Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are really thrilled you're here with us today because we have just a fascinating stack of notes to get through.
Yeah, really interesting stuff today.
It really is. It's centered entirely around this operational program in Georgia. It's called MentalSpace School.
Right.
But, before we even get into the actual mechanics of what they do, I kind of want to start by throwing a quick quiz directly at you.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it.
Just think about this for a second. How much do you think therapy costs for a family on Georgia Medicaid, if they go through this specific program?
That is, well, it's the kind of question that usually comes with a ton of fine print in the healthcare world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, do you think it's $50 a session? Maybe like $25, $10.
Right.
$0.
Yeah.
If you guessed zero, you completely nailed it. For families on Medicaid, the out-of-pocket cost it's literally nothing.
Which is pretty rare, to say the least.
Exactly. When I saw that specific figure in the notes, it just it completely rewired how I was looking at this whole source material.
I can imagine. It forces you to actually pay attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, we hear so much theoretical talk about fixing K-12 mental health, but that $0 figure sets a very, very aggressive, practical tone for everything we are about to explore.
It really does. And, to give you some context on why that $0 mark is so significant, providing mental health support inside a K-12 school environment is, well, historically, it's just a logistical nightmare.
Oh, totally. The red tape alone.
Exactly. You are dealing with minors, you're dealing with rigid school schedules, parental consent,
Yeah.
and, of course, incredibly complex insurance billing. It's this tangled web that usually just results in completely compromised care.
Right. People just slip through the cracks.
They do. But the sources we're looking at today outline this highly specific model that claims to, well, solve the access problem, the cost problem, and the legal compliance problem all simultaneously.
Which sounds almost impossible, right? But the way they are delivering this care is really the first major structural shift we need to look at.
Okay, let's break that down.
So the core delivery method of MentalSpace School relies on two main pillars, according to the text. It's same-day teletherapy and dedicated therapist teams per school.
Right.
And the best analogy I could really come up with for the same-day teletherapy piece is, well, it's like having an emergency room for mental health right in the school nurse's office.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, but, delivered through a screen.
That is actually a highly accurate way to visualize the mechanism, because that same-day aspect it's not just a luxury feature, right?
Right.
It is a strict clinical requirement for genuine crisis intervention.
Why is that timeline so critical, though?
Well, just consider the traditional timeline for a student in distress. Like, say, on a Monday, a student exhibits a severe behavioral issue or maybe signs of deep depression.
Okay.
On Tuesday, maybe they get to see the overloaded school counselor. On Wednesday, the parents are finally notified and given a list of, external therapists.
We were probably all booked up anyway.
Exactly. By Thursday, the parents are just leaving voicemails everywhere. And then, 3 weeks later, they finally get an intake appointment.
And when you are a teenager, 3 weeks is an absolute eternity.
It's a lifetime.
If you are in an active crisis on a Monday, talking to someone on a Thursday almost a month from now, that doesn't help you navigate the hallway on that Monday.
No, doesn't
The
it?
window to actually intervene has completely slammed shut by then.
Exactly the problem. And same-day intervention completely collapses that timeline.
Right.
The student is triaged and speaking to a professional while the incident or the crisis is still actively occurring.
Which prevents them from falling through those systemic cracks.
Precisely.
But here's the part of their model that really made me push back on my initial assumptions when I was reading this.
Oh, what was that?
Well, the notes emphasize heavily that they use, quote, dedicated therapist teams per school.
Yes.
Why make that specific distinction? If the entire platform relies on telehealth, isn't the whole primary advantage supposed to be scale?
You would think so.
You're right.
Yeah.
Why not just use a massive randomized pool of available operators where, whoever's free just clicks a button and takes the next student in the queue?
It's a great question, but they are actively avoiding that sort of call center approach. And the psychology behind that decision is just vital.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, a random pool of telehealth operators is incredibly efficient for simple medical triage, finding out if you have pink eye or a sinus infection.
Right, where it's purely transactional.
Exactly. But mental health is entirely predicated on trust.
Right.
So by assigning a dedicated team to one specific school, those therapists actually learn the unique lived culture of that environment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they get to know the administration, they understand the localized stressors affecting that particular student body, and they just become a predictable presence.
Okay, I can really see how that changes the dynamic. I mean, think about your own high school experience for a second,
Oh, boy.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you were struggling with a really complex social dynamic or, I don't know, severe anxiety,
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to explain the entire hierarchy of your high school to a brand new person on a screen every single time you logged on.
It would be exhausting.
You want to talk to the person who already knows the cast of characters, basically.
Exactly. It's the difference between going to an urgent care clinic where you are just, a number on a clipboard
Right.
versus seeing a family doctor who has known your history for years.
Yeah, that continuity of care makes a huge difference.
It's the absolute foundation of effective therapy. The student isn't just this disconnected case file. They actually belong to a community that this specific therapist team is monitoring.
Right. Which, honestly, makes me question the boundaries of that community a little
What do
bit.
you mean?
Because when I read further into the source material, specifically regarding the scope of their services,
Mm-hmm.
I actually had to stop and reread a section.
Okay.
Because this is explicitly billed as a K-12 school support program.
Right. Or
But the text highlights that they also provide staff wellness and family counseling, right alongside suicide and violence prevention.
yeah, it does say that.
That feels like massive scope creep to me. Like, why blur the lines between the school building, the home, and the staff room?
I see where you're coming from.
If the primary mandate is student mental health, why are we spending resources counseling the 10th grade math teacher or, the parents?
It totally looks like scope creep until you consider the reality that a student doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Okay, fair.
You literally cannot treat a child in isolation for 45 minutes, send them right back into a high-stress classroom or a turbulent home environment, and just expect the coping mechanisms to hold.
Wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. By integrating family counseling and staff wellness into the exact same program architecture, MentalSpace School is essentially treating the entire ecosystem as the patient.
So the environment itself has to be stabilized before the student can actually heal.
Precisely. Let's look at the suicide and violence prevention aspect they mention in the text.
Yeah, let's look at that.
True crisis intervention rarely relies solely on a distressed student just, voluntarily coming forward.
That almost never happens.
Right. It requires the adults in the room, so the parents at the kitchen table and the teachers at the whiteboard, to be vigilant. They need to be emotionally regulated and supported themselves.
Okay, yeah.
Paint a picture of a teacher with 30 students who is completely burned out, struggling with their own unaddressed anxiety, and receiving zero support.
They're just surviving the day.
Exactly. That teacher is far less likely to notice the subtle, quiet signs of a student slipping into a crisis.
I'd argue it goes even deeper than just noticing the signs, too.
How?
Well, if a family is in, financial or emotional turmoil at home, that tension bleeds directly into the student's baseline anxiety before they even step off the school bus in the morning.
Oh, 100%.
So supporting the ecosystem is literally how you protect the student.
It really is. It is a profound shift from the traditional, fix the isolated kid mentality to a support the village methodology.
Yeah.
But, and this is crucial, to effectively counsel an entire diverse ecosystem of students, families, and staff, the care providers on those screens need to meet an incredibly specific standard.
Right, because you can't just throw anyone in front of that screen.
Exactly. The text provides deliberate details on their clinical qualifications.
Yeah, the notes state the therapists are licensed, diverse, and culturally competent.
Right.
And I really want to highlight that culturally competent piece because for a K-12 student, talking to someone who intuitively grasps their background, their neighborhood culture,
Yes.
or the specific family dynamic, honestly, that is the difference between opening up and completely shutting down.
It absolutely is.
If the therapist fundamentally misunderstands the cultural context of what the student is navigating, their advice isn't just unhelpful, it can, actively damage the trust
Cultural competency in a clinical setting is absolutely a clinical necessity. It's not just some modern buzzword
Right.
because it removes this massive invisible friction of a patient having to basically educate their therapist on their basic reality before they can even begin to address their trauma.
Which is just exhausting for the patient.
Exactly.
But, as bulletproof as the clinical qualifications might be, the sources point to an entirely different side of this operation, a heavily bureaucratic side.
Ah, yes. The red tape.
Yeah, the massive logistical hurdle of data privacy. The text explicitly states they are HIPAA and FERPA compliant.
Right.
So just to clarify for everyone, HIPAA is healthcare privacy and FERPA is student educational records privacy.
Correct.
Usually those two domains are kept violently separate, like they do not mix.
And they are kept separate because they are fundamentally conflicting mandates.
Really? How so?
Well, imagine trying to speak two completely different legal languages at the exact same time without a translator.
Sounds terrible.
Right. So IPA dictates that a patient's medical records are strictly confidential. Nobody gets to see them.
Right.
But FERPA dictates who within an educational institution can actually access a student's file.
Okay, I see the clash.
Yeah. If a school counselor needs to know a student's diagnosis to, say, provide educational accommodations, but the outside clinic cannot legally release that info without violating IPA.
You end up with a completely paralyzed system.
Exactly.
So how does this model actually bridge that gap? Because the notes say they are compliant in both, but what does the mechanism of that compliance actually look like on the ground?
Well, it requires building a highly specialized dual consent infrastructure.
Right.
They aren't just, casually sending emails back and forth. They utilize secure, siloed communication portals.
Right.
So the raw clinical session notes remain strictly protected under IPA on the medical side.
That makes sense.
However, specific actionable accommodations like a note saying a student requires a quiet space for severe anxiety that can cross over that barrier to the school's FERPA side,
Oh, wow.
but only through explicitly engineered, legally compliant release workflows that the parents sign off on. They have essentially built the translator for those two legal languages.
That is fascinating because navigating that dual privacy maze takes years for a normal school district to figure out on their own.
Oh, yeah. Years and a massive legal budget.
Right, but they don't have years. The sources bring up a very specific looming threat here.
The legislative deadline.
Exactly. The text says MentalSpace School provides, quote, HB 268 compliance support, and it explicitly notes a July 2026 deadline.
Right.
Now, the notes don't give us the full text of whatever HB 268 actually is.
No, they don't.
But just the presence of a hard state deadline entirely changes the dynamic for school administrators, doesn't it?
Oh, it changes it from a theoretical improvement to an immediate mandate. The state of Georgia has clearly dropped a hard legislative deadline requiring schools to meet this rigorous new standard, likely regarding how they track, manage, and report student mental health.
Right.
And the reality is that school superintendents are educators. They are not healthcare compliance officers.
No, they definitely are not.
They do not have the runway or the budget to build legally compliant healthcare frameworks from scratch before July 2026.
So MentalSpace School isn't just selling therapy to these districts. They're basically selling a turnkey solution to a massive legislative liability.
Exactly.
A principal can look at this and realize they can instantly meet their state compliance mandates without having to, become a legal expert in medical privacy overnight.
That is the immense administrative value proposition here. They just absorb the compliance risk entirely on behalf of the school.
Wow. Okay, let's summarize the architecture of this before we get to the most surprising part.
Sure.
So you have this immediate, legally compliant, whole family care ecosystem. It's delivered same day by dedicated, culturally competent therapists. Right. And it simultaneously solves a looming legislative headache for the state.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
When you stack all of that up, the obvious assumption is that the price tag must be just astronomical for the families.
Right, you'd think so.
But let's look at the actual business model, because the financial mechanics they outline are arguably the most impressive part of this entire source stack.
I agree. We established early on that the cost for Medicaid families is $0,
Right.
which is wonderful. But relying solely on Medicaid reimbursements is notoriously difficult for a private healthcare operation to sustain without taking massive losses.
Right, which is why I really want to focus on how they actually afford to do this.
Let's do it.
The notes list out their commercial insurance partners, and it is a massive, comprehensive umbrella.
It really is.
They take BCBS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and AmeriGroup.
Yeah, that's practically everybody.
Exactly. And the text states that for these commercial insurances, it is typically just a small copay.
So the mechanism of their financial sustainability is deeply rooted in that broad commercial net.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, by integrating deeply with almost every major commercial provider in the region, they are capturing the volume of commercial revenue that would normally be scattered across, dozens of private out-of-network practices.
Oh, I see.
Right. That steady base of commercial cross-subsidization is what actually allows them to process the massive volume of Medicaid students at a $0 out-of-pocket cost.
Wow.
And they do it without requiring astronomical upfront stipends from the school districts themselves.
It's a structural approach to billing that actually supports their core philosophy.
Exactly.
There is a specific line in the notes that I think basically operates as the mission statement for the entire organization.
What's that?
Access shouldn't depend on income, period.
Yeah.
Now, it's very easy for a healthcare startup to just print that on a brochure.
Oh, they do it all the time.
But it is significantly harder to build the complex billing infrastructure required to legally and financially actually pull it off.
Yes. They are architecting a system meant for mass accessibility rather than functioning as like a boutique wellness service exclusively for wealthy, well-funded school districts.
Which is usually what happens.
Exactly. We can analyze the brilliant telehealth technology or their holistic ecosystem approach all day long, but none of it matters if a family looks at a copay they can't afford and just decides not to log on.
Right.
Removing the financial barrier is literally the prerequisite for everything else they do.
It's one thing to have a beautifully designed financial model and, fantastic intentions. What really matters is the empirical reality on the ground.
The actual results.
Yes. When you actually deploy this zero-barrier ecosystem into a real school, what actually happens? And the source material provides us with the outcome metrics, and they are wild.
They really are. The data points they chose to highlight are very revealing about what their priorities are.
Okay, let me walk through the exact success metrics they reported.
Go for it.
They cite an 85% family satisfaction rate. They cite a 92% reduced anxiety rate. And they cite an 89% improved attendance rate.
Those are massive numbers.
They are. Now, I love a good statistic, but I want to pause on those last two.
Okay.
I'm looking at this 89% improved attendance rate alongside the 92% reduced anxiety rate. And it seems to me those aren't two separate, isolated metrics.
No, they're not.
They're basically the exact same metric in disguise.
Yes.
If a kid is fundamentally terrified of the school environment, they just don't go. You cure the terror, and they suddenly have the ability to walk through the front doors.
You are identifying the direct causal chain here, and it is honestly the most critical insight in this entire data set.
It just stuck out to me immediately.
Because school avoidance, where a student is chronically absent or, refuses to leave the car in the drop-off line, or is constantly migrating to the nurse's office to escape class,
Yeah.
that is very rarely an issue of a student just being lazy or defiant. It is overwhelmingly a direct physical symptom of untreated, severe anxiety. The fluorescent lights, the social pressure, the academic demands, the school environment itself becomes the trigger for a nervous system response.
So improved attendance isn't just an administrative victory for a principal who's trying to boost their numbers.
No, not at all.
It is a clinical victory. It is the literal physical proof that the underlying anxiety is actually being managed.
Exactly. When MentalSpace School provides that immediate same-day intervention we discussed and successfully reduces that underlying anxiety by 92%,
Yeah.
the natural, inevitable byproduct is that the student's nervous system can finally tolerate being inside the building again.
Wow.
The 89% improvement in attendance is basically the physical manifestation of the 92% reduction in anxiety.
That is incredible. And then, you layer in that third metric, the 85% family satisfaction rate.
Right.
That completely validates our earlier debate about why they even bother offering family counseling in the first place.
It does. The high family satisfaction rate proves that the ecosystem approach isn't just theory.
Right.
The parents feel supported and equipped, which obviously lowers the tension at home. The student is less anxious, which means the student actually goes to class.
And the teacher has a regulated student who's ready to learn.
Exactly. It is a completely closed, positive feedback loop. The entire model is designed to stabilize the ground the student walks on, rather than just, treating the symptoms they present with.
It really is an incredible system. So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive? right now.
Yeah, where do we go from here?
Well, the source material ends with a very specific practical call to action. It simply says, share this with a family who might need to hear it.
Which makes perfect sense.
Because a program like this, a model that relies on erasing financial barriers and utilizing complex insurance networks, it only works if the people who desperately need it actually know it exists in their district.
The structural brilliance of the program is completely irrelevant if it remains a well-kept secret. Word of mouth is really the final necessary component to make the model function.
So based on the notes, if you are located in Georgia or you know a family or an educator who is, and you want to look into this infrastructure further, the contact details provided in the text are their website.
Right.
It's MentalSpaceSchool.com. You can also reach out to their team directly via email at mentalspaceschool@cheesetherapy.com.
Excellent.
It is incredibly rare that we get to analyze a source stack that doesn't just outline a massive systemic problem, but actually presents a fully realized operational solution with the data to back it up.
It is very rare, and it really forces a broader perspective.
It really does.
As we wrap up this analysis, there is a concept I want to leave you with, something to just kind of chew on long after we finish today.
Right.
We've just spent this time dissecting a localized system in Georgia that utilizes a zero-barrier, same-day teletherapy model to yield 89% better attendance and dramatically reduce student anxiety. If those are the tangible, proven results of simply removing the friction to care, what happens to the traditional historical structure of the K-12 school day if this level of on-demand integrated mental health support becomes the standard everywhere?
Wow.
How much raw human potential are we currently leaving on the table across the country just because a family couldn't afford a copay or navigate a privacy law?
That is the perfect question to leave things on. A structural solution to a human problem. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.